Alright, this morning we're going to continue our MongoDB project, and we're going to continue our MongoDB project this morning by looking at the structure of JSON data. So when we talk about actually importing data, one of the things we want to know exactly how our data are formatted and how we're going to be dealing with it. Now, in terms of MongoDB, various people have their approaches to it. The way that we're going to do inserts in this case is looking at formatting where we're going to pass in values. And what I mean by that is, if data formats are already in JSON, we already have a utility to import the data. For instance, in my course, we cover how to automatically import JSON data. So that's not actually a problem. It's when data may not be in the JSON format, how we're going to go about building JSON data, okay? And so this is one of the keys for doing some of these inserts. So let's go ahead and look at a structured example, I should say, of JSON here. So this is one document. If I were to import this into MongoDB, it would be one document. So you see that I have a first name, a last name, then I have address, and then I have a description. Actually, let me do this as lowercase. That makes more sense. And we see that we have the first name of Curious, the last name of George, and then we have an address in a book, and then of course we're not sure where Curious George actually lives. And then we have a description of Curious George. Obviously he's a monkey, and secondary here is that he's curious and he gets into trouble. Okay. Now this right here is a sub document, and you'll notice that in this sub document, just like this is a sub document here, the difference is this only has one value, whereas this sub document has multiple values. Okay. So the reason why we note that, and this would be stored very similar to this in MongoDB, right? But the reason why we note this is because we're not going to, we have to think ahead how we're going to structure our JSON. For instance, in a tool like SQL Server, we might have our values, or not really might, we would have our values in a table format where you have your columns, for instance, column 1 and then column 2, and then you'll have like value 1 and value 2, and then you'll have value 3 and value 4, and so on and so forth. What this really is this is row 1 and this is value 1, and this is row 2 and this is value 2, and this is row 1 and this is value 3, and this is row 2 and this is value 4. And the reason why I note that is you'll see that in this example we're not repeating the column names. Okay, we're not repeating the field names. Now in Mongo we do, right? Each document is going to also store the field names, right? Or the key names. Again, this is really, key value pairs. Okay, so however we structure our automation, however we structure our JSON building, if we're going to build a JSON document, we have to keep that in mind. If I was going to take a CSV and I was going to, for instance, turn this as a case in point into a JSON document, my JSON document is going to look something like this, where I'm going to have column 1, and then I'm going to have R1, V1, and then I'm going to have column 2, and I'm going to have R2, V2. And then I'm going to have this same thing here, the same structure. The difference is now it's going to be R1, V3, and R2, V4. Okay, so this is the JSON equivalent to that, right? So, and that's not a bad thing. It's just if I was going to write a MongoDB, let's say, solution, and I was going to pull data from SQL Server, obviously I would get my column values. I would store my column values, and then of course I would go through each row. This would be these column values here would be stored as variables, and then I would of course populate these values here. Okay, so the structure of JSON is different, much different than something like a CSV, but that doesn't mean that you can't automatically build it. There are ways to automate it. It does start becoming a little trickier in these cases. Now, there may be situations in which we will store data, and we're going to cover a specific example like this, where we're actually only looking to populate subdocuments. Okay, so we're not actually looking to build an entire document structure. For instance, in our example that we're going to be working on, one of the things that we're going to want to do, I'm going to open up yet another window because I just don't have enough open right now, is to actually populate what I call a habit date. Okay, and this is going to be the date that I import the habit, and it's going to be auto-populated. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just say auto-populated. Okay. Then what will happen is we're going to actually build completed habits, and this is going to be a subdocument. Okay, because there's going to be multiple habits in here, and I'm not going to fill the subdocument in because this is just an example. And then we're going to have current habits. Now, in this example, and the reason why I provide this is that I'm going to actually pull this from files, right? So my structure is already built because I'm going to reuse this structure. And then I'm just going to pull these from files. So depending on how we're building our example, whether we're going to build it something like this, we would automate based on this file here. Actually, in a CSV, Mongo will import a CSV. But if we're not, if we're going to populate it off of a table, we can still build it off like a structure like this. If we want something more complicated as this, then we have to figure out exactly what doesn't change, what's going to be dynamic and what's not going to be dynamic, and how we can pull those values from being dynamic, and how we can sit there and pass the other values that aren't dynamic. We can just keep them there. And like if it's going to be a first name always and then a last name, then we know that we can just hard code those in and then pass in those variables.